This is Traci Harrell, and we are now sitting here with Dr. Joye Hardiman, and I am so excited. Dr. Joye, we're bringing this into a session where we're going to be talking about, it's our Bigger Than Me success series, and we are focused on achieving racial equity and inclusion in business, education, wealth, and health. And what's super exciting about this is when I met you, I was just like, oh my God, I feel like I am just going home. You know what I mean? You have such, um, why don't you introduce yourself first? Tell us who you are and why are you so amazing?
Hi, okay. My name is Dr. Joye Hardiman. My students call me Dr. Joy or Dr. J. I have been a higher education architect. I have been a professor. I was the former director of the Evergreen State College Tacoma campus. I am an artist. I'm a storyteller. I'm a world traveler, and
You're amazing. You're just amazing. And so the reason I have you today, so we're gonna, you and I are doing some amazing projects together. There's gonna be some amazing stuff that's happening. But today, I just have you here for a very specific reason. What I loved about our conversation is that you introduced a term to me. I'm gonna bring up an image here in a minute, and it was called. It was an African term. So you have your PhD in African Egyptian studies.
my PhD is in ancient Egyptian or ancient Kemetic, because Kemet's the real name for Egypt. Ancient Kemetic autobiography. Oh no, sorry. Ancient Kemetic literature. Ancient
Okay.
Egyptian.
I love that. And so when we were talking and I was telling you about this initiative that we're leading, and I mentioned that I was going to have a civil rights activist, someone who changed, was part of that movement, um, joining us. And there's others that I want to bring in when we bring in the past to look forward to the future. You mentioned this term. Can you tell us what it is as I bring in some images and why it's so important? What does it mean? This concept of Sankofa?
Sankofa. Yeah, Sankofa is a term that comes out of the Ghanaian cultural environment, and it's an image of a bird that is reaching backwards while it's moving forwards. And the Sankofa has a seed in its mouth, and the seed is the wisdom of the ancestors. And so it's like reaching back, returning. All right, yes, this is a great one. I like this. Returning to one's past, to one's ancestral wisdom, so that one can be engaged, so that one can learn what strategies and concepts and behaviors can be applicable in contemporary times in terms of community, individual, world vitality. So it's like the ancient wisdoms have some contemporary solutions, and that's what Sankofa is all about.
I love it. We found this one as well. Tell us your thoughts of this. It was a description.
Right, yes.
Sankofa.
Sankofa is a sacred ancestral term from the Akan people of Ghana, West Africa, which when it's translated means we must go back and reclaim our past so we can move forward. And I would add, and this one says, so we understand how and why and how we came to be who we are today. And I would say, no, it's even much more. It's understanding who we were in the past, how we functioned in society when we were at our best. When were those points of highest being? When were those points of lowest being? And look at all the mixture of that and figure out what are lessons that we can use in the future from our ancestral experience in the past.
I love that. You had something to say when I pulled this image up. What did you call this one?
Oh, this is a gold weight. This is from the Akan, the Ghanaian tribe, the nation, Ghanaian empire, and these were solid gold, and so it shows you the esteem that this concept had,
right,
to our African foremothers and forefathers.
Wow. So obviously I got a little carried away. And I got like maybe 100 images of these Sankofas.
Right. So the Sankofa, right. And it's a beautiful, and that's another symbol of the bird. And in fact, if you look at the architecture of in Savannah, Georgia, and New Orleans and stuff, you will
Mm-hmm.
find that symbol in the
This image.
yeah, in the fences, in the gates, and things like that.
Mm,
Because the enslaved people were blacksmiths, and so when they
mm,
here and they were forced to make the structures and to build the fences and stuff, they put their symbols inside to be an affirmation to themselves that we may be enslaved now, but let's go back to the past and remember, in fact, when we were, artisans and craftsmen and things like that. Let that seed nourish us so we can move forward in the future.
I love that. Now, a number of the images that I found were so gorgeous, and some of them were paired up like this. And they all, you're right. You see the seed in the mouth. So as you think about the work that we're doing now, it's hard work. And one of the things I knew we had to do was go back in time, like, to talk to people who've been through the civil rights movement. I feel like we're in civil rights part 2, right?
Yeah.
To go back and get those lessons learned. So the seed, does that represent the lessons learned, the nuggets? You mentioned something about the valleys. Can you tell us about this whole concept of, because we're talking about the trauma. Part of what we're doing in this initiative is we're acknowledging, I'm asking people, all people, to just acknowledge the trauma that we're experiencing today, not slavery trauma. Not that we do have residual from that, but I'm talking about trauma that we experience every day in corporate America. I'm being very specific. When I say achieving racial equity and inclusion in business, education, wealth, and health, there's trauma that's happening today. And the only way for us to fix it is for us to talk about it, to acknowledge the trauma. And when I mentioned that, you had something to say about this bird and the concept of trauma as relates to going back in history. Tell me about that.
Right. Well, if we go back in history far enough, I mean, we have trauma, and we have trauma, individual trauma, and we can go back and look at that. We have racial trauma, and can go back and look at that. We have gender trauma. Trauma is trauma is an occurrence. It is not a condition. And in Western society, we make it a condition. But if we go back far enough, we can understand from our ancestors, first of all, in ancient Kemet, trauma was not a concept. Tragedy was invented by the Greeks. Before the Greeks, people, the whole idea that something could happen and then you would be damned for all mankind, like Oedipus, like Antigone, that was the first time trauma, intergenerational trauma, was introduced into the Western consciousness. Before that, our ancestors didn't think in terms of that because trauma is based on notions of either or. And because we worked in notions of both and, what we did is we looked at people, if people were going to describe their lives, how they would describe their lives was not in terms of the hills or the valleys, but they would describe their life in terms of what they lessons learned and wisdom earned from the experience, which automatically turns you into a victor as opposed to a victim, because you have control over your story that way. So going back into going back to Sankofaing and keep going to back to find out how were things at the beginning, and what can we carry through to the future.
I love that. There's so much we could talk about, but you and I are going to do some deeper dives. One of the things I do need to noodle on just a little bit more is you just said, and it just basically connects these various dots that we've been talking about as a part of this initiative. You just talked about, you use Sankofa. We just saw those images. Again, I have like 100 on my computer. I just got really into it. But you use the term as an verb, an action word. You said we are Sankofaing. We are looking backwards in order to find the victory, the lessons learned, so we can move forward even more victoriously. There's no victims when you're Sankofaing. If you talk about slavery, if you talk about trauma that happened in the business, it doesn't matter. We're not pointing blame. Talk to me about Sankofaing as it relates to those of us who have experienced trauma, racial inequities, racial exclusion. Why it's so important for us to tell our stories. Telling our stories to really regain or to claim our victory. Talk about that. Why is that historically relevant?
Right. No, yes. I mean, you said it really beautifully. And it is all of us. I mean, have to stand Copa in. mean, first of all, we have to understand, again, if you Sankofa enough, you get to understand things like, for example, in higher education, we're talking about equity. Well, we can't talk about equity unless we change our language, because even we study the liberal arts. That's fixed, that's a codified. And we have canons, and we talk about literature in terms of the canons, and we talk about the big guns. It's this Western literature is taught as this militaristic, kind of conquering entity. But in our ancestors in ancient Kemet, we studied the liberating arts. The difference between thinking in terms of gerunds, in terms of things being in progression. I am a human being. I am not a noun. I am a human in the process of becoming. I am a gerund. And if we understand our gerunds, it doesn't make any difference what our skin is, because we're all on this journey to becoming human, to becoming humane. And we're just at different points in our development. And going back and Sankofaing will give us the tools, the canes, the staffs to walk as we are being our verb self. So trauma is a noun. Trauma turns you into a noun. I am traumatized. Whereas Sankofaing lets you understand that this too shall pass. That healing is possible, in the world, and that there are models of healing and not getting stuck in the addiction to tragedy.
We could keep talking. We could keep talking, but we both are over time, and we have some other. We're going to go deep on the African heritage. You are a genius. I literally sat here and thought of 10 other things that I could talk to you about, but I know I'm over time right now. I'm going to respect your time. I just wanted to say thank you for that tidbit. Now, if you had to give some words of wisdom summarizing this concept of Sankofa and Sankofaing as it relates to the journey that we're on right now, we're asking our white brothers and sisters, our non-Black brothers and sisters, to join us on this journey of racial equity and inclusion to achieve. That's why it's called achieving racial equity and inclusion, because to your point, it's a gerund. It is a progressive, right, activity.
Yes.
So if you were going to empower, because it sounds very empowering and encouraging that it's all about lessons learned. You're basically saying we are here to move on this journey together. So what encouraging words could you say to those here experiencing this session today around, we will use our lessons learned, we will overcome and move forward. We can achieve racial equity and inclusion together. This concept of allies, how do you comfort an ally who doesn't feel ready, equipped to help with change? But we know that allies are important for change.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm trying to condense it as much as I can. First of all, I don't deal with whiteness. I grew up in Buffalo, New York. I had lots of friends that didn't look like me, but we were ethnically, but so I knew Jews, I knew Polish people, I knew Irish people, I knew Italians, I knew Quakers, I knew people who had culture. There's no culture in whiteness. I mean, there's no white land or anything else. So I don't deal with the term whiteness. I don't also deal with the term ally. I like abolitionists. My motto is.
Wait a minute. You got to help me. Then you got to define. So define abolitionist as relates to this cause. I'm using the word ally. You to help me to differentiate the two. I love abolitionists. I love the concept, but define it for us and make sure we're all using it the same way.
Because abolitionists understood that we could handle it, our stuff ourselves, and what we needed them to do is go into their communities and do the work in their communities. To do the cultural. First of all, to do the cultural work themselves. I think anybody that wants to do this equity work and stuff has to come to the table with something in their hand. And what you have is your culture, because in your culture you have traditions of hospitality, you have traditions of inclusivity, you have traditions of of civility within those cultural protocols. And if you understand those cultural protocols, then you can come together because everybody has their equivalency. But you can't come help me if you don't know who you are. So what I say to my Jewish friends, to my Italian friends and stuff like that, embrace and study your culture first and understand the goods and the bad and work with your people. And then when it comes time for the escape, and we need a place to hide, you got a place, you got an attic, you got a so-and-so. When we need somebody to be hired, when we need our kids to get jobs, you got a place. And so I'm right now, I'm just thinking about these right now. So I'm gonna be doing a study of Quakers because Quakers knew how to work simultaneously with brown and black people without taking it over, without becoming the person, the speakers, without, because we need to do our work, and everybody needs to understand where their sphere of influence is and work in that area. All of us have a piece of privilege. Let's figure out our privilege and work it. I don't need an ally to work in the garden with me. But I sure do need, after I get my things grown, for them to buy my goods. I don't know if that's clear.
Sorry, yes, it's very clear. So what I'm hearing you say is an abolitionist is different than an ally in that, because I'm gonna say yes and.
Yeah.
I hear you. I hear you. So you're basically assessing that word, associating that word with their ability to go back into their communities, into their company, to change the cultures, but I kind of see that as allies as well.
But see, it's a difference in positionality. An ally wants to be right next to you, and I want to come to I want to come into your community and be your ally. And I'm saying, no, I got my community. I am not the problem. My community is not the problem. It's your community that's the problem. And I can't go to your community to do the work. So I need you to go to your community, do the work. I'll do my work in my community, and then we'll make the thing, and then when the revolution comes, we'll be right there because we have done our work. So
okay, I love that.
Yeah.
You see, that's why I appreciate these conversations, because you allow us to get deeper and closer to some understanding. So for allies, abolitionists, how do you think about the word advocate?
Like advocate,
okay.
but advocating not for us, advocating for justice or advocating for something. We know what to do. We are not the problem. We are not the pathology. We really are not. The problem really is over there. People just need to work with it, just like we did. It's not easy doing the work.
It's not easy.
Some people are not going to hear it. Some people are going to call you bad names. That happens in any community when you're trying to resurrect truth from the chain of falsehood.
Well, hold on, Miss Miss Joy. I'm gonna have to edit this video because this is too good. So I'm gonna edit it because this topic is going to be really important. But you have a book that's coming out, and it's about truth, resurrecting truth from the what?
From the chains of falsehood, from all the isms, from all the preconditions, from all the notions like we are tragic, we are tragic and we are victorious, So the book is all about, it's an incredibly beautifully illustrated book by a young woman from Venezuela who is a political refugee. So she brings that perspective in terms of seeing a country that has been overruled by truth. By falsehood. And so, it's going to be, it's a parable. And then it's going to end with strategies for how do we maintain truth in our universe.
So how do we? First, you have to acknowledge that there is no truth. I feel like that's the hardest part of this journey for me. The reason we're saying we want to achieve racial equity and inclusion in business, education, wealth, and health. It's critical to do, but there are people who still don't believe there's a problem. So that's a falsehood in itself. So I feel like okay, let me bring some more evidence. Let me continue to bring the equity studies. Let me bring some more metrics and data. And then I realized there's tons of data and metrics. Let's make sure we're elevating the stories. Let's just hear from real people. I think if they could see us as real human beings that deserve like an equal right, that it would be a different, evolution. We'd be able to get to a better place because the numbers are clear. You can ignore the numbers just like you can ignore the stories, but I'm hoping like looking in someone's eyes and feeling the reality of their situation is actually going to help people to acknowledge the truth. Are there any strategies that you could share from your book that talks about acknowledging or resurrecting truth from the chains of falsehood? Because the falsehood is right now there is no problem. What's happening in corporate America, what's happening in the streets of America, choking out George Floyd. There's no trauma. There's no injustice. There's no inequities happening in corporate America. That's the falsehood that I'm fighting against. And I'm saying, well, I would, point of clarification, I would disagree. So what strategies would you share to resurrect truth?
Well,
Resurrect is probably the wrong term because it's never been resurrect would assume that it was alive and someone killed it.
right. Yes, and it was. But see, that's what Sankofa says.
Oh,
Sankofa
okay.
tells us that once upon a time, truth ruled the world. That's what Sankofa says. Sankofa doesn't say, once upon a time we woke up in evilness and everything was a despair and somebody ate an apple and then everybody got kicked out of a garden and stuff like that. That's traumatizing. That's the myth of trauma. That's not how our ancestors, and not just African ancestors, but many indigenous ancestors. That's why I want people to go back and study their culture, because people will understand. Like, say, for example, if you're Irish, you've got an amazing kind of cultural tradition, an epic tradition that talks about values and talks about harmony and stuff like that. If you go back in your culture and get that, and then you bring that to me, and I have my culture, then we got some stuff going on. But so rule number one is that one has to work on disrupting the dominant narrative, disrupting the master narrative, exposing it everywhere, and that's what's happening right now. The pandemic is disrupting the master narrative. It's breaking things open, and everybody can see the kind of underbelly, you turn up a rock and you've got all those little things.
Exactly.
Now we're disrupting the master narrative, and so people what's happening right now is the first stage in the resurrection of truth. What you're doing, getting people to look and and to look at their programming and look and seeing how they have what is true and what's not true. We're re-examining history right now. We're being able to unearth all these gems and all these models that are going on in the universe, and we're doing it with ourselves. We're looking and finding out how much Kool-Aid did we drink. We didn't know we were drinking the Kool-Aid. But we did. We all did. You can't live in America. You can't, if you didn't drink the Kool-Aid. But so we're reprogramming ourselves, and we're reprogramming ourselves so that we can move beyond the single story. Like that beautiful video that the woman did about how we have to operate in complexity, how we have to be comfortable in both and if we can, and so that way we can see those things that we think are poor and pathetic as being very, very rich. It's like all the even though we're not supposed to say the word anymore, critical race theory, according, but all the truth that comes out of that work that talks about looking at cultural capital. So it's like re-imaging. How do we move toward truth? We look at those things that hold us back, those things that are negative, and we re-image them, and we shift the premise. So we stop calling people deprived when we say that they are culturally rich. We look at the skills of having to to understand that people have, that if you have a big extended family, you have social wealth. If you've had to negotiate the welfare system or any kind of system like that, you've got navigational skills. If you just were able to survive your day without slapping somebody in the face, you got skills. And how do we take those and look and celebrate those? That's how we restore truth back. And everybody out in this audience is doing the very first two steps, which are the critical ones. Which is examination, and expansion.
Examine and expand. Is there more? Is there anything else you want to share?
I don't. Well, I.
Okay.
Well,
I know we're short on time, so I apologize. I apologize for running us
no,
over.
no, no, no,
Uh,
no.
you, 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 you're amazing. So we're going to bring you back for a deeper dive, and we're going to go into some more juicy content like this. This is absolutely amazing. You are incredible. Like I said, I know we can talk about a ton of different things. You've committed to being a part of this community as we move forward. So we look forward to having you join the conversation. And as various elements come up in the dialogue, we just look forward to you bringing us Sankofaing us back to the goodness that you find in that we can find in our culture, because most of us, our culture was stripped from us, but we don't know these things. I mean, that was one term that just lit me up, and you got the terms, you got you know everything about our history and the richness and the positiveness of our history, things that we can learn from. So I look forward to having you as a part of this journey as we move forward. This has been amazing as usual. I think I said to you before when we first connected, I said, I feel like when I connect with you, that you're like, someone who didn't know. I didn't know I was parched, but you're like a rain falling on a parched desert floor. And I didn't know I was parched until I started hearing from you and you sharing these rich cultural elements from our history and from our heritage. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is just what I needed. I'm sitting in my garden right now and I'm like, I know how it feels when my babies are really dry and they start to shrivel. These are very responsive to water, right? They get one day past where they want to be, and the leaves are like, there's no question. I didn't know I was like this when it came to my culture, my people. I didn't know until I started hanging with you. To Don Mason introduced me to
Dr. Mims, Dr.
Dr.
Maxine.
Mims, Dr. Maxine Mims, and then Dr. Maxine, and that connection, I connect with you, and there's some others, and it's just like, these are my people. Praise.
Wakanda forever.
I love it. I love it. So I know we're over. What time is it? 4:37. You have a couple more minutes.
Sure.
You got a couple more minutes. You can
Yeah.
say no, and we'll cut that
No,
out
no,
of the recording.
I do. I have a couple more minutes. Yeah.
So because
After
I know.
five.
Okay, perfect. So me too. So what I heard you say, you have so much that you've done. I just want to pull out one little nugget, because you talked about whiteness, how when I guess you were in corporate America, in the business world, and then you found your way back home. And what term did you use? You did some video series around,
It was
what was it
called
called?
The Soul Comes Home.
A soul
A
comes
soul
home.
comes
Yeah.
home. And
Mm.
part of
Are there
it was part of a homecoming series that I did.
are there
Um,
any lessons from that we can apply to those of us who are, again, this is about achieving racial equity and inclusion in business, education, wealth, and health. And I'm bringing in some African wisdom. I'm saying Kofaing. We can go back in history and move forward. I feel like I'm going home. I feel like my soul is going home. I'm finding my people, the heritage and the culture that I never knew. I grew up relatively poor in a, you know, I'm not gonna say I definitely wasn't suburban, but it wasn't the ghetto either. So it was somewhere in between, modest
uh-huh.
modest upbringing. But I knew that all I wanted to do was make enough money so I didn't have to eat food that I didn't like. So I didn't have to be worried about rent. I didn't have to worry about my lights getting shut off. I just wanted enough money to be, and I knew that it was about education and working in corporate America. It was pretty simple to me. So I did that for 25 years. That was my definition of success. I got there and I realized, wow, like, you know, this is amazing. I was blessed. I had amazing experience. I lived around the country, around the world, in Mexico and Rio, Brazil, and amazing companies, amazing people. But in that space, there's a responsibility that comes with that. If our people are in this space and the experiences are less than optimal, the experiences are traumatic. Well, like I said, I had youth coming to me wanting to commit suicide. Interns saying, Miss Tracy, why? Why do they do this to us? There's some accountability. We can't just be in the space and not being a part of change. So for me, I had to be a part of change. For me, I'm not in corporate America anymore. The divine universe had something better for me. And I'm here still trying to change what we consider to be it's not the destination. There's multiple destinations, but that's still one of them. And for us to be able to acknowledge the change, my question to you is, I feel like as a part of my journey, it's been a beautiful journey, but now this beautiful part of my journey, I'm coming home. So what lessons learned, what invitation can you offer, to those of us, whether you're black or white, we're all coming home. There's all these lessons learned. As we said, Kofa, there's so many positive lessons learned in looking back and Sankofa-ing and
I
finding
think
our
the
home.
major thing I would want to say is that it's possible. And I mean, I know that sounds very, like simple or something else like that. But yes, there was a novel that basically characterized American literature for a long time. Thomas Wolfe wrote a book called "You Can't Go Home Again," and that was the whole notion, is that you had to leave the house and you couldn't go home, and so I think the prodigal son is one of the most, it's a very, very powerful story. And of course, there was a comedic story before The Prodigal Son. The Prodigal Son was written about, I'd say, let's see, story of Sinuhe, about 1,500 years before The Prodigal Son was written. In ancient Kemet, there was a story called Sinuhe, the story of Sinuhe. And Sinuhe was a very bright, up and coming young member of the government, and highly favored. And he chose the wrong side. He got kind of
Caught up.
attracted by the bling, and he ended up leaving the country. He ended up like leaving the country, and he went to another place. And because he was a Kemite, they welcomed him because they knew that he had all this knowledge and all this stuff like that. And he became a big man in the country, and he got even to marry one of the king's daughters. But it wasn't all so good, because there were a lot of the men were very, very jealous. He was a stranger and he was sleeping with the king's daughter, so they challenged him to fighting and all the time. And he always won because he was really strong, but he got tired. He got really tired, and one day a spirit voice came to him and said something about come back to the black land where you belong. Kiss the ground and mingle with the people. And he returned, and he was scared. He was scared because he didn't think he was going to be accepted, because of all the reasons that he left before, because he didn't fit in, because he wasn't the right size, he wasn't light enough, he wasn't dark enough, all those kind of fears we have with us that make us leave our home. But he realized he had to come home to self first. And then once he came home to self, then he could come home to the community. And then he could come home, to the people. And he goes back, and he, of course, is welcomed, and and he kisses the ground, and acknowledging his ancestors, acknowledging his Sankofa, by kissing the ground. Those are the ancestors, and then being able to mingle with the people. So I think what's happening to a lot of us in the corporate world is basically in the corporate world, you have to be, the major qualification for success is being white. I mean, that's the bottom line, and so what you do is you make yourself as white as possible so that you can be successful. But bottom line, you're not going to be white. On the very best day of your life, you're not going to be white. You can act like it, you can talk like it, you can do all the things, but you're not, and somehow, because in our souls, we're relationship people. When we live in an objectified world, when the world is all about money or objects or acquisition, that is viscerally painful to our being. And ultimately, if you're a being of, ultimately, and some people, ultimately, I want to say, if you're a being of, I don't want to say of soul, or if you're a being of spirit, or if you're a being of, or whether you're melanin, at some point your melanin kicks in, what happens, something happens that you realize, no, this isn't for me. And I think a lot of us in corporate, you get around and you miss people finishing your own sentence, and you miss not having to explain, something or to people, and you just want things to be easier. And so you come home. And I think we're all in a process of coming home. And, I came home because I was first generation integration, and they made me think that if I was going to be successful, the whiter I was, the better off I would be, and so, yes, Pop. Yeah. But that's why I reached out to you, because I felt like, well, you're like in my story. You're a truth seeker. You know, they buried truth, and then all of a sudden there were truth seekers who came upon the land, and they'd been different places, but they knew in their genetics, they knew in their spirit, they knew in the way they danced, they knew in the way they decorated. You know, look at you, decorating, creating yourself your jungle. You know, they knew those they were blessed enough to know that they were dying. And
do you know how deep that is? What you just said?
they were blessed enough to know they were dying.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a blessing. I think an ancestor comes, something comes, a vision, somebody just says, you're dying. Get out. You know, get out, like the movie. They're clinking the teacups. They're clinking the teacups. Get out.
And, you know, it's about what you just said is wow. I mean, you it's almost like you're telling my story because I couldn't honestly I couldn't leave because I would have been leaving my people behind. Does that make sense? Like I
Yeah,
couldn't
no,
leave.
totally
I
right.
couldn't leave. I felt like I had an accountability and a responsibility. And if not me, then whom?
Mm-hmm.
Right? If
Mm-hmm.
not
Mm-hmm.
me, then whom? And if not like in the moment, then when would we actually drive change? So I
Exactly.
couldn't leave. Like I did like seeing my check hit every month too. I mean, the 15th and the 30th of each month. I really enjoyed that. But I was so focused, even after the lady who was over DNI, even after she said to me, Tracy, this is all great. Like I was led this adaptive leadership, equity, and inclusion initiative in the company, and she was like, you know, this is great, and I'm sure there's pocket. This is great. Love what you're doing. I had done within my operations organization. I had done worldwide presentations. My leadership team was relatively receptive. I was still being traumatized in the space. I was still not getting credit for the work I was done. I was still already been traumatized, which is why I was like, but these are good people. Like they can do better. They just don't know better. I literally just assumed that they didn't know any better. I had to. It's like we have to assume that. Do you agree? Like you have to assume.
I
You
think you have to assume that many don't know any better. I think you also have to assume that many know better.
well, it's
I mean,
interesting that you
there
say
are some,
that.
there are some genuinely evil people in
See,
corporate.
in my heart, I couldn't allow that to be a thing because then I would be like somebody showing up looking like an angry black woman. So
Yeah, yeah,
I couldn't
yeah,
allow myself to believe that people were actually harming me intentionally. I had to believe that these were
right.
good people who didn't know any better. I didn't have an option. I had to believe that. I still believe it to this day. I think people aren't comfortable being uncomfortable. I think as a part of this initiative, what we're doing now is we are absolutely moving the conversation to you're gut you this is where you can't be in this space and not know. We're making it very clear. You got all the numbers, you got all the stories. No one's going to be able to come through this process and say I didn't know. So now if you choose to not deliver on a different level of activation, this term I'm calling courageous activation, if you choose not to take your knee off our neck, if you choose not to stop corporate chokeholds, these things that we know are the barriers for Black professionals in corporate America, then you become, by definition, an organization that is yet to be determined if it's a safe place to work. We can't say it's not safe, but it's yet to be determined if it is. Because even if you're not doing the right thing, what do you think about that concept? Because you know they say that you know, you have to bring a demand. Like power does not concede anything without a demand. The demand is acknowledge the truth, acknowledge the truth of the existence for some, and and that means simply saying I'm willing to enable. I'm calling them these bigger than me moments. It's a bigger than me whole protocol that we put into place that says when someone feels like they're being choked out, that there's a corporate chokehold in play, unconscious bias, unequal performance standards, similarity bias, lack of CEO accountability, no one's being held accountable. If those things are happening, then you call a pause, basically. This feels like a bigger than me moment.
That's why
I'm easy, baby.
I
Right?
know.
so
That's
so
my ringtone.
I love that. I love that's one of my favorite songs. So, and I know we're over, and someone actually was trying to
But
get into this room.
and see, this is very interesting, and I'm listening
I
very
see you.
seriously.
Yes.
Um, and I'm appreciating what you're saying. You know, I'm appreciating what you're saying. I um I do, however, think that this generation and the one before it could have a little bit of naivete that's a little bit dangerous. If I
Well, help
stand,
me out, sister. Help me out. That's
no,
why we have you here. Help me
you
out.
no, you're doing well. You're doing really well. No, and I was just listening to you from one of my, you asked me about the different steps and how you keep truth in the world. And one of the ways I believe is like the Willie Nelson song: know when to hold, know when to fold, know when to walk away, know when to run. And when I right, and when I say that there are some people who genuinely have troubled souls. I mean,
Mm.
I'm just operating both and I'm saying that in the South, they knew that. You know, it was really clear. That's why people say living in the South was much easier than the North, because you knew who it was that was going to burn a cross on your porch. In the North, you never know. You never know who's going to deny you
Well,
the.
well, what's really interesting, when I moved here from the South East to the
Yeah.
West Coast.
Right. Yeah, and I'm just saying, some people, I guess this is what, bottom line, for me, I choose to put my energy where I can know that can do the best good.
Tell
And
me
if there's
more. What
something
does that
that
mean?
I know that is not going to change, I'm not going to put any energy into them, because
Right.
that's their karma. They got to deal with that. What I have to deal with is fortify all the good people. What I have to do is make sure that those people who are in the struggle get supported, and get validated and are given water. Now if there's water left over,
For the
I put it on the table, for someone else to take it. But so, and I know we're talking about, and that's the difficulty of this work that you're doing with the equity and stuff. But I think, I mean, and you're just making me think. Because every time I think something, then I hear something different. You said it going on in my head. I think, okay, John Lewis. She's being like John Lewis, who, I went to jail 40 times, but he still loved. I can still love.
Mm.
But he also knew that some of them people was crazy.
Oh, I
And
think some people are crazy for sure. Sorry. Crazy and evil are two different things.
okay, all right.
So I think there's some crazy people. In order for that, the reason I started a ministry first before doing this work is I had to have love permeating through my blood. Because I was literally, when I say traumatized at Microsoft, and an organization where I know the CEO, Satya Nadella, I think he's a good man. I think he's an amazing CEO. I think it loses some traction somewhere in between. Person over diversity, and I'm not probably not supposed to say negative things. I don't think she's even evil. I think there was a level of complacency for me to be in the middle of trauma that I made very clear what was happening. Not just me. I said I have 1,000 interviews, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people having very similar experiences. And this is the solution. This equity and inclusion initiative is the solution. For someone to say to me, I know there's some good stuff here. I know there's probably even pockets of the companies that are ready to do this work, but we're going back to the basics. That's what she said to me. We're going back. A white woman who had worked at IBM for 30 years. I worked at IBM for 8 years, so I know the IBM culture. She was with them before I got in. She was in the big blue IBM. The I ain't got to do nothing because I'm fully empowered and complacent IBM. So
right.
I'm not saying she's a lovely person. I connected with her, Lindsay Ray, lovely lady. But Lindsay Ray, I would love for her to be a part of this initiative because I think she's like the ground that we need to water her. We need to fill her cup because Satya Nadella has her leading the diversity and inclusion initiative. My invitation is to you, Lindsay Ray. Satya Nadella, you need to be part of this too, so you can help to guide and make sure that y'all land where you're supposed to land. But I would love to have Lindsay Ray because that's like, you got to bring the person in who is the most in need. And she's leading the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, leading them. Help me, Jesus.
Right.
I didn't even end hating them. As I was getting fired, I swear to God, the Lord reminded me, and that's what's in my story. That's the story that this best-selling book called Ignite Happiness. even though I was traumatized, and the book is my chapter. I have my own solo book, but I put a squeezed in version of my chapter, my book, my story in that chapter. But I talk about even though all this horrible stuff was happening to me, I ignited happiness the entire time. Like most of the time, God gave me perfect peace. It's bigger than you, baby. I got you. It's bigger than you. I knew I was on a mission. I knew that I could change things. I knew that my suffering was all for a purpose. I
Right.
knew that I would be able to change things. And I did change some hearts and minds for sure. I had people activate with me saying, oh my God, I love this. This is exactly what we should be doing. I also had leaders say, Tracy, you know what, the worst thing that I ever like to tell someone, ever, that I hate to tell someone is you're ahead of your time. We're not ready. That did not slow me down. It was almost like it fell on a deaf ear. Thank you for sharing. I'm ready. I'm not ready to not be ready. I'm not ready to not move this forward. So I just continued, and I even put into my performance evaluation what I required. If we know adaptive leadership is the right thing, I require an adaptive leader. My exit strategy to Microsoft was we don't have any adaptive leaders. We don't know how to be adaptive leaders, and we're not ready. We're not ready. Thank
Mm-hmm.
you, and peace out.
Right. Right. Right.
and,
No.
and just to be clear, it was the happiest day of my life. It broke me free. It broke me free. That's what I write about in my story. It was like it was a corporate bully. I talked about it. It was I had encountered a bully when I was younger at my first bigger than me moment when it was like, oh, I had to step up. I had to fight my core values of justice and progress. I'm not gonna let this girl beat up on somebody else. I was like, Judy, let's do this. So I'm fighting. Like I had to step up. Nothing in me would allow me not to step up. Same thing happened when I was in corporate America. Inside, you can only do so much when you're inside stuff. You got to have people inside that are being willing to fight the fight, people
Right.
outside that are willing to fight the fight, so that together, to your point, those advocates and abolitionists and allies and advocates and who's champions, whoever they are, it's like it's going to take all of us, a little bit of everything, for us to
Mm-hmm.
get to a better place,
Right. Right.
right?
Right. No. And I hear you, and I thank you for that because I was being Western. I was into either or, and you very strongly Sankopaed me back to both and. So that and the fact of if in fact I totally really believe, which I do, is that we're gerunds and not nouns, and that we have possibility of developing and possibility of becoming more human, then I need to walk my walk, or I need to walk my talk. So thank you for allowing me to reflect on that and say yes, no, we cannot. It is against our nature as Black people to think that people are not redeemable. That was what the mammies knew and everybody else. Little Charlie, we believe you are redeemable. We believe that if we can, and sometimes, so and and thank you for that. Thank you for that
No,
reminder.
thank you. You again. Thank God. Like I said, I had to start a ministry first. God, I had to start a ministry first. Like I had to spend almost a year just in prayer and meditation. I was traumatized. I could not believe the shenanigans. I could not believe there was a lot that and I also was for the first time acknowledging my feelings because when you're bullied, which that's corporate bullying, when you're bullied, you can't acknowledge your feelings because then the bully goes deeper and harder, right? So you basically got to kind of like nothing's happening here. We had some therapists on talking about when you're traumatized, there's a problem that happens. There's no truth in it when you don't acknowledge even that you're being traumatized, right? You know how we just pretend like nothing's happening.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
what you said the Egyptians didn't have any reflection of trauma. How did they go from something bad is happening to what you described as the hills and the valleys and going to the lessons? Like it was just kind of their default. That's kind of how my brain works. I didn't even know it was Egyptian, but that's just kind of how my brain works too.
Right.
This is a
It was
problem, but we can
right,
get to a
right.
better place.
Right. Because of the ecology, that they were blessed by having an ecology. The land taught them. The Nile would flood every year, and wipe out everything. I mean, it would flood. But then after it flooded, the ground was so rich that they were able to grow these amazing crops and wheats and stuff like that. And then after the harvest, they'd watch the stars and they would know that the Nile was going to rise. And so everybody just kind of moved out the way and it just flooded. And so and so they lived with the Nile River, and then this beautiful fertile land 3 miles, and then the desert. So they
Mm,
constantly lived with both and
mm,
then Nile, the Nile itself was divided into the Upper Nile and the Lower Nile. And if you messed up the Upper Nile, that would do things bad to the Lower Nile. And if the Lower Nile did something, that could back up the waters to the Upper Nile. So they had to understand the harmony between two. They lived the harm. Their daily reality is that this is a world of both and. You know, we have both desert and we have fertility. We have upper and we have lower. We have good pharaohs and we have bad pharaohs, and that's all within the nature. And so even when they have the picture of the Nile Valley, of the river, they called it happy, and happy is amorphidic. It has both breasts and genitalia, because it was both, and it was both the nurturer, but it also could be it gave birth, but it could also starve you to death if there was a famine and something happened and it didn't rise, or somebody dammed it someplace and it couldn't get to you. So they lived it. They were, as different than the Greeks, who lived in the mountains, where it was, and in Greek city states, and they were isolated states, and you had to war with each other because there were limited resources. And so they built a culture of adversarialness, whereas when you're in a sun culture, you can have a culture of harmony, because, and the guy Edwin Nichols talks about it all the time. When you were living in the north in Europe and stuff like that, and living in the caves and things, as a woman, you had to be subservient to your man, because if you weren't subservient, he'd kick you out that cave and you freeze to death in the snow, or get eaten by a mastodon or something or other. Whereas if he was in Africa and your man got crazy, you just walked out, went to another tree, cut down some branches, built yourself your own hut, and pick the oranges and the stuff like that from the trees, because they'd be like that. So our women became much more independent, because the environment allowed for abundance. When you live in abundance, you have to have you can share, you can be complementary, you can do both and. But when you live in scarcity, you've got to do either or to survive. So just even the ecology, shaped us. You're on mute.
cute. I just said, wow, you're so intelligent. And I love the references, these very strategic references. What you just talked about is the ecology. You talked about the difference between Egyptian history,
Right.
like
Uh-huh.
saying Kofi, looking backwards, and Greek and European culture.
Right.
This idea of scarcity versus
Abundance.
surplus,
Right.
abundance.
Uh-huh.
And it's interesting because, well, that clicked in my head, and I know we're actually literally over, so we must stop talking right now because it is at 5:03. Um, so let's stop talking. But I was going to use the term about power.
Use the term what?
Talk about power. So
Power.
power. When we think about like the power structures that exist in corporate America, for example, if sharing power, which is really what we're demanding as a part of this new initiative moving forward, if we believe sharing power, Brene Brown talks about power. She talks about privilege, perspective, and power. When she talks about power, she says power is infinite, right? When you give up a little to me, it's not taking away from anything from you. You're just enabling me, right? You're helping me, but you're not harming yourself. That's the duplicity that you just described. So if you think about like advice that you would give to someone who grew up in a scarcity culture, and that's just how their brain works, and the corporation has a scarcity culture where giving power to Black people, allowing them to actually identify, state, this is happening to me, this is not a safe place, harm, what do they say, mayday, mayday, right? There's some power that needs to shift. So what advice would you give to those people to shift the power, who might be afraid that shifting power, someone said in one of my interviews that people of people in power believe that there's a there's a depletion happens when you try to bring equity to others. So there's some duplicity that happens in their brain saying, I want to make things better for them, but I don't want to harm myself. So what conversation would you have with them based on we don't have to have this conversation now because we're literally 3 minutes over, but it just came to my mind. I didn't want to stop the flow if there was something flowing.
Well, I'll just say really shortly, and I'll just say, I think you're doing it already. I think what happens is in corporate America, first of all, you're never going to get the equity in those things because the structure, the value system is hierarchical. So unless you can break the hierarchical structure, but in the meanwhile, you're doing it's about relationships. It's about they don't have any skills in relation because everything they've done is about object and it's all about acquisition and it's about hierarchy and it's about exclusion. Then there are no skills and there are no relationship skills. There's no because that's not the value system. Whereas with us, the value system is all about relationship. So they have to develop some skills, and because they're so far over like this, corporate America is so far again because all the relationships are phony and they're based on the golf course and they're based on acquisition. And they're based on not all of them. Not all relationships are phony.
I like how you balance that out.
right. But so that they have to see each other. They have to hear each other's stories. The only way that we're going to get any kind of, that was the thing we learned in charm school. I learned it in charm school. I read it in Emily Post. And she said, when you're introducing people, you always say 3 things about the person to the other person so that they can try to find a common bound of conversation. So this is so if I was going to introduce you to my daughter, I would say, this is Traci, and she can do amazing things with environment just the way you do, because you like to, style things and create some environments in different ways. And I would say, and so I would mention 3 things so that when I walked away, you all would have the basics. That's what they taught us.
That is really genius.
Right. So it's actually according to Emily Post.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Emily Post. And I also love what you said. You're amazing. You really are amazing. I'm so grateful and blessed to have you. What were you going to say? I heard an and.
Oh, no. And I was saying, and Emily Post is part of the Sankofa.
What do you mean?
Because we have a whole generation of people who don't know anything about etiquette and civility. We have a whole bunch of people who have never sat down for Sunday dinner. It's not part of their cultural milieu where you learn those kind of conversations and stuff like that. So going back and pulling, from Emily Post is going back, and Emily Post basically was taught probably by a Black woman in the South someplace who was probably her man, and so now, Emily, sit up straight. Emily, don't put your hands on your table. She goes, oh, I can appropriate that wisdom. All right. Post.
That is hilarious. I love what you said. And there is in our bigger than me movement and these bigger than me moments, there is an escalation of what that means, what that needs to look like. And one of the key elements is there is no hierarchy. Nobody has titles. Everybody comes. It's bigger than me. It's bigger than you. It's bigger than all of us. So we just come to the table. Everybody at an equal footing, right? We are all the same and we're all equal. So very exciting.
Wait, one word switch. We're all at the table and we're all equivalent. We are not equal. Think about that for a second.
Lord Jesus, what you got to say? See, I was just going to let my other 2 people in, but I can't right now. What do you got to say? Tell me what you're saying about that.
I said equivalency. Equivalency is that
is that like equity and equality? Is that the kind of difference that you're saying? Equal but equivalent?
What I'm saying is that we're not all equal. We're not all 6 foot tall. But we all should be at the table because we all bring equivalency. Maybe I cook. Maybe you guard.
We're all valued. How about that?
Right. We're all valued.
That's actually the word that I use. I actually use valued. I don't use equivalent. Right. It's actually we're all. Every opinion is valued, equally valued. Every perspective is equally valued. That's actually the term I use. So thank you. I just said equivalent.
Great. Yeah.
But thank you. Please continue this. This you see the learning and the loving. The Sankofa.
Well, this has been delightful. This has been a great way to spend the afternoon.
Thank you.
What was great is that the sun came when we were doing our interviews, and when we were got Sankofa, the wind started to come. And it was like, okay, the ancestors are having a good time with this
They are
conversation.
loving this conversation. They are. Oh my goodness. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Mwah, mwah, mwah.
Much
Kisses.
love.
You're
Okay.
so wonderful. How do you end? Do you like certain end like sessions like this? I would normally end in prayer, but is there African uh some cultural something that we're supposed to do? You know, I know I saw you introduce go into a session,
Right. Yeah.
and then this is an exit. Is there any exit strategies?
Um, um, the only exit strategies I do, you know, if I do ancestors, is that if I call the ancestors, I release them. I
Ooh.
tell them because you don't want them hanging around all day, you know, watching you pick your nose and stuff like that. They got stuff to do. So we call them, but people sometimes call them and don't release them, and they just get so tired.
That is so funny. I did watch you do an introduction thing. I did watch that. So okay, so these people are in. I'm gonna go. I adore you. We'll talk to you
Right.
soon.
And tiny prayer. 1 second from your part.
Say that again.
That's how you end.
I do
So
end. Thank you for granting me that grace, Lord. I just thank you once again. I thank you for Dr. Joy Hardiman. I thank you for allowing us to come together, Lord, in such a beautiful natural space. Both of us outside, just loving up on the nature and the beautiful day that you've given us, Lord. And I thank you for giving her the heart to want to serve, to want to give, to want to share, to want to learn. Thank you, Lord, for just giving me the capacity to take in all these information and integrate it into this work that you want me to do, Lord. Thank you for giving me the confirmation that this is the exact work your work you would have me to do. In Jesus' name, I just thank you and I praise you. I ask that you continue to keep Dr. Joy happy and healthy. Continue to keep us all motivated on the work that we're doing. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Ashe.
Thank
Okay.
you. Hey, do you want to meet some people before you go?
Okay.
You want to meet some people? Okay,
Sure.
hold on.
Hello.
Hello, ladies.
Hello, hello.
Okay, so I'm gonna.
Hello.
How are you? So
I'm
I
doing
wanted. So Larissa, I wanted to introduce you. Who's your friend? What is your friend's name again?
Ellie.
Ellie. You are
I'm
gorgeous.
Elena.
Elena,
Thank
can
you.
you turn your camera the other way?
Yes.
There you go. That gives us more room with you. And then we got to get
Ye-
a little bit more light on your face. So I think you have to turn a little bit, angle yourself around. But I want you to say hello to Dr. Joy Hardiman. I'm going to have you guys do a quick introduction so we're all kind of leaning in. And you look amazing, Larissa. Wow. You look amazing too. What's your name again? Can you?
Elena.
Ellen. Let me type
Yes.
that in here. Go ahead and do a quick introduction. Dr. Joy Hardiman, I know you introduced yourself to me, but just for this introduction, do you mind saying hello to these beautiful people?
Sure. Uh, um, okay, I don't know which person I should be, but yeah. Hi, I'm Joy Hardiman, Dr. Joy Hardiman. My students call me Dr. J. I am on my fifth retirement, and, and I'm embarking on a whole new career. I was the director of the Evergreen State College Tacoma campus for a long time, and now I have a creative production company called Ancestral Artworks, which basically looks at how ancient wisdoms can be used in contemporary times.
Wonderful.
And this is Dr. Laprissa Chuprina. Laprissa, Laprissa, Larissa, Larissa, I knew that. I'm combining your first and your last name.
Yes,
Laprissa.
I like it.
Larissa, why don't you do a quick introduction as well?
I'm an international educator, and currently I work as a language specialist, helping King County and other government and for-profit organizations to communicate with the linguistically diverse communities as an interpreter, translator, and community outreach. I have many years of teaching at the university, and I was teaching cross-cultural communication, diversity, and inclusion.
Excellent, excellent, excellent.
And Elena, what's the deal with Elena? Her camera's off. We're just
Yeah.
gonna say.
Just oops. I don't know what happened. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you want to introduce yourself real quick and get your camera on?
Yes. So I'm arrived in USA about 5 years ago. I'm from Europe. In Europe, I finished University of Economy. So since I'm arrived here, many years before I lost of my family, so I just wanted to do something different, just to make difference, not to change something in my life. So the last year I dedicated more in nutrition, helping the people, in motivation speakers. So yes, I did, and I do a lot of amazing things. And like a person, I grow up with a lot of information. So since I was child, I've been passionate about having a healthy life now. And at the time, definitely, I didn't know anything about nutrition, about our body. So yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
We held you over, Dr. Joy. It's such a pleasure to connect with you. Mwah, mwah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's have a delightful conversation. I'm sure it will be thrilling.
Thanks.
Take
Bye.
care. All
Thank
right.
you.
Much
Thank
love.
you.
I'm gonna stop this recording,
Bye.
ladies. Thank you.